On the day I married Lord Chen Yue in my elder sister's place, he thrust an abacus into my hands and said with frost in his voice, "The Shen family does not shelter idle mouths. If you wish to remain under this roof, you will earn your rice and shelter with this abacus." I bowed my head and spent 3 years managing his household with painstaking diligence, recording every wen and tael, just to prove I deserved to eat. It wasn't until I saw him present my elder sister with a kingfisher feather headdress worth more than I'd earned in a year that understanding struck like lightning. The Shen family wasn't impoverished, and Lord Shen wasn't frugal by nature. He simply chose to be miserly with me alone. I packed my belongings, left the abacus on his desk with a letter of separation, and walked away. As I reached the gate, a steward called after me, "Young mistress, you haven't settled this month's room and board." Without turning back, I replied, "Tell your master the Shen manor charges too dearly. Chen Yue is going to live elsewhere." The summer heat pressed down like a wet cloth, cicadas shrilling their endless chorus. Rain dripped from the curved eaves in steady rhythm, splashing onto the stone courtyard below. I carried a paper umbrella, my mother's ashes carefully wrapped in silk within my bundle, and walked through the side gate of the Shen estate. The gatekeeper, dozing against the wall, opened one eye. "Does the young mistress require a sedan chair? The masters have all gone to the theatre today. Only the servant carriers are available. Half a tael of silver should suffice." I shook my head. Why hire a sedan when I had no intention of returning? I heard him spit behind me, muttering, "Freeloader," under his breath. My heart remained calm as still water. I was already considering whether to travel to Suzhou by boat along the canal or join a merchant caravan heading south. The servants' contempt merely reflected their master's attitude. Lord Shen despised me, so naturally they treated me like an unwanted stray dog. Though not a servant myself, I had endured my share of their scorn these 3 years. After some thought, I decided to inquire at the merchant guild halls first. My mother had never been comfortable on water, and I feared disturbing her rest even in death. The streets of Linen teemed with life. Even beggars worked the stone bridges with practiced confidence. Cautious by nature, I spent a few copper coins gathering information about a reputable porcelain merchant who would soon travel south along the ancient trade routes, passing through Suzhou. His shop stood beside the famous Yunlai tea house. Compared to the tea house's grandeur with its hanging lanterns and painted beams, the merchant's establishment seemed modest. I was negotiating passage when a familiar voice drifted through the carved wooden door. "Has the kingfisher feather headdress been delivered to the Chen residence?" It was Chen Yue. I glanced up to see him emerging from the tea house, dressed in moon-white brocade robes with a jade pendant hanging from his belt. A satisfied smile played across his refined features. His manservant bowed low, hands clasped. "Naturally, my lord." Lady Wanru was delighted beyond measure. "Though, if this humble servant may say, your wife was present at the time and seemed displeased. Perhaps you should offer her some explanation." Another young gentleman, waving a folding fan decorated with landscape paintings, laughed. "To spend a fortune making a beauty smile, that is true romance. What does it matter if a wife complains? Surely, Lord Shen, you're not henpecked." Chen Yue's elegant brows drew together, the smile vanishing from his lips. "She eats my rice and sleeps under my roof. What right does she have to object? Besides, Wanru is her elder sister. She should show proper respect and understanding." I stood frozen in the merchant's shop for a long moment, my fingers gripping the edge of the wooden counter. Few people remembered that my sister and I shared the same birth date, born on the same day within hours of each other. But the firstborn daughter of the principal wife always claimed precedence in status. My father had declared Wanru the elder, and so hierarchy was established. She was pampered like a precious pearl, raised in the inner courtyard with every luxury. For me, even a bowl of rice without counting the grains was sometimes beyond reach. My mother was frail, a lowly concubine who had lost my father's favor after my difficult birth. Her monthly allowance disappeared into medicine and physician's fees, leaving nothing for the servants. My mother was gentle and skilled with embroidery, often sewing small ornaments for me from fabric scraps, butterflies and plum blossoms stitched with careful love. Once, Wanru saw a cloth hairpin I wore and snatched it from my hair. We quarreled in the garden. She wailed theatrically, and my father's bamboo cane fell across my back. My stepmother, Madame Liu, said nothing, only watched me with cold calculation in her eyes. I knew I had transgressed somehow, but I didn't understand the unspoken rules I'd broken. When I limped back to our remote courtyard, my usually gentle mother made me kneel in the garden for hours under the hot sun. Her voice shook with terror as she spoke, touching my bruises while tears soaked through my thin robe. Remember this, Yue. You must never compete with others for anything. Your mother is powerless. I cannot shield you from harm in this household. From that day forward, I learned to yield, to make myself invisible. But life only grew harder with each passing year. It was around that time that Chen Yue began visiting our household for poetry gatherings and garden parties. Once, he happened upon me arguing with a cruel kitchen servant who had stolen the medicine meant for my mother. Perhaps it was youthful chivalry, or perhaps mere whim, but he had the servant beaten and dismissed. I was like a mouse dwelling in the rafters, secretly watching as he took my sister on garden walks and boat rides on West Lake. A seed of foolish longing planted itself in my young heart. I never imagined that one day, that elegant young scholar would become my husband. During that period, a new emperor had ascended the dragon throne after the previous emperor's sudden death. The Chen family had supported the wrong prince in the succession struggle. Their noble title was reduced 2 ranks, and the once vibrant Lord Chen Yue fell from his horse during a hunting accident, leaving him with a permanent injury to his leg. My father, official Chen Daren, valued his reputation above all else. He wouldn't break the betrothal contract negotiated years before, but neither would he send his precious legitimate daughter to a life of reduced circumstances. So his thoughts turned to me, the concubine's daughter. For the first time, I saw something resembling fatherly affection on his stern face. It looked as false as a painted theatre mask. Chen Yue has reached marriageable age, he sighed with theatrical sorrow to my stepmother. It is time she established her own household and brought honor to our family. Madame Liu patted my hand with practiced sympathy. I know you are a filial daughter. You would want to see your birth mother receive better medical care, wouldn't you? If you agree to marry into the Chen family in your sister's place and conduct yourself properly as a wife should, your mother's medicine expenses will be covered by the main household accounts from our ancestral funds. I agreed. Shortly after, in an ill-fitting red wedding dress, with a pitiful dowry of barely 8 small chests, I was carried in a simple sedan chair to become Chen Yue's wife. On our wedding night, he swept the ceremonial red candles and wine cups to the floor in fury. Your Chen family has remarkable audacity. Pawning off a concubine's daughter on me, you preserve your family's face while I'm forced to support a useless burden. What an excellent arrangement for official Chen. I lowered my head in deep shame, kowtowing until my forehead touched the cold floor. For my mother's sake, I had to endure any humiliation. This humble one can work. I won't be a burden to the Chen household. He considered this for a moment, then retrieved a wooden abacus from his desk drawer, his eyes full of contempt. Very well. The Chen family does not shelter idle mouths. If you wish to remain here, you will record every expense in this household ledger and earn your keep. 1 qian of silver for a meal and 2 nights' lodging. Even the cloth for my monthly needs had to be carefully earned and negotiated. The embroidery I made and the items I crafted were deemed without value. Only by managing the household accounts to his exacting standards would he grudgingly credit me a few extra coins. But no matter how carefully I calculated on that abacus, clicking the beads late into the night, I was never full. In winter, my hands and feet were numb with cold despite the braziers burning in other parts of the manor. I didn't have enough silver saved for charcoal in my own room and had to request an advance against future earnings. He neither agreed nor refused, only smiled with cruel amusement, twirling his jade thumb ring. I've seen many women like you, Chen Yue. No spine to stand up for yourself, yet you insist on pretending to have dignity. He then casually pushed a letter of separation across the lacquered table. If you'd prefer to return to your father's household, I would send you with 100 loads of firewood as parting compensation. Think of my generosity. I silently took the document and placed it in my sleeve. What use was dignity when my mother needed medicine to draw her next breath? I endured several winters in this manner, my fingers cracked and bleeding from cold and constant work. If not for the long, suspicious silence from my mother's courtyard when I sent letters. If not for witnessing him present my sister with jewelry worth more than a common family's yearly income. If not for the unbearable humiliation at Wanru's birthday banquet when she paraded that kingfisher headdress while I served tea like a maid, the thought of leaving might never have taken root in my heart. The porcelain merchant was scheduled to depart at the hour of the rabbit the following morning. His caravan was substantial, delicate wares carefully secured in straw-padded wooden frames. Keep your hands to yourselves, the caravan leader warned sternly, his weathered face serious. Touch what isn't yours, and you'll answer to me and lose your deposit. My funds were desperately limited, so I offered to prepare meals for the traveling party in exchange for reduced fare. With cooking skills like yours, girl, one of the guards joked warmly, you'll have no trouble finding yourself a devoted husband in Suzhou. The journey presented challenges, bandits on mountain roads, swollen rivers to cross, but the caravan's hired guards drove off threats with practiced efficiency. We even spotted a contingent of Imperial cavalry on the main road, their armor gleaming, riding with grim determination towards some urgent purpose. I witnessed landscapes I'd never seen before, terraced tea fields, misty mountains, villages built along canals. The weight pressing on my chest gradually lightened with each li we traveled. I thought of Shen Yue less and less with each passing day. We reached Suzhou in the 8th month, when Osmanthus flowers perfumed the air. The caravan leader presented me with a small porcelain teacup as a parting gift, painted with a simple plum blossom. Not valuable, but a gesture of human kindness I hadn't felt in years. I learned that my mother's ancestral village lay deeper in Jiangnan, accessible only by small boats through the water channels. Tu Wen for passage. Last trip before the sun sets. An elderly boatman called from his small wooden vessel, standing with his long pole. Halfway across the still water, with willow trees trailing their branches, the boat suddenly lurched violently. Ayo! There's someone in the water, the old man cried out, pointing with a gnarled finger. A man in dark robes floated face down among the lotus leaves, his black hair spreading like ink in the water. I could see the glint of military armor beneath his outer garment, the type worn by the emperor's elite guard. Save him, uncle. I insisted urgently. I'll pay extra. Please. The old man grumbled but maneuvered his pole expertly. Together we hauled the unconscious man into the boat, water streaming from his clothes. He was heavy with muscle and armor. My mother's village would have to wait. I carried the man, with the boatman's help, to the nearest medical clinic in the water town. The physician, an elderly man with a long white beard and wise eyes, took one look at the unconscious stranger and began scolding me immediately. You foolish girl! Why did you wait until your husband was at death's door before seeking treatment? Do you have no conscience? I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment. Honored doctor, his not, mother. The man on the examination table suddenly opened his eyes weakly, his hand reaching out to grasp mine with surprising strength. Mother, don't abandon me. Juna needs you. His voice was delirious with fever. So you're his stepmother, then, the physician exclaimed, his mind clearly racing with assumptions about our ages and relationship. The world has certainly changed. Such young stepmothers these days. I could only sigh deeply in helpless resignation, too tired to explain. I scratched his palm in frustration at the absurd situation. I didn't notice the slight flutter of his eyelashes or the hint of awareness in his supposedly unconscious state. Back at the Shen Manor in Linen, Chen Yue returned to his residence in the evening. Chen Yue, he called as he always did upon entering his courtyard, expecting her to appear with tea and his evening clothes. But only silence answered. Usually, she would be waiting by the door, quiet and subservient, anticipating his every need. Go and inquire whether my wife has returned from her family's residence, he ordered a servant with irritation, assuming she'd gone begging to her father again. The gatekeeper delivered his report, kowtowing respectfully. This humble one reports that the young mistress returned very briefly to collect her belongings, then departed again through the side gate. She didn't even request a sedan chair. Perhaps she lacked sufficient silver in her personal accounts. The household steward added helpfully, consulting his records. She refused to pay this month's room and board charges. She stated that the Shen Manor's rates are too expensive, and that she intends to reside elsewhere. Chen Yue snorted dismissively, pouring himself wine. Is she trying to manipulate me with theatrics? Where else could she possibly go? The Chen family won't accept her back, I know official Chen's pride. He felt irritated rather than concerned, as one might feel about a disobedient servant. Let her suffer some nights at her family's cold reception, he thought, drinking deeply. Then she'll understand that her husband's household, despite its rules, is the only place that will shelter her. He didn't notice the letter resting on the dressing table beside the bronze mirror, weighted down with a smooth stone. His old leg injury ached that night, throbbing with the dampness. Usually, Chen Yue would massage it for him with patient, careful hands, applying the medicinal oil she made herself. Now, the bed felt empty and cold, and a strange hollowness echoed through his chest like wind through an abandoned courtyard. 2 days later, unable to sleep properly, he relented. Prepare a proper sedan chair and go to the Chen residence to fetch my wife home, he instructed his personal attendant. Tell her no silver is required for this journey. Bring her back. But he didn't know that Chen Yue was never coming back, that she was already far beyond his reach. I remained in that Jiangnan water town for over a month while the stranger's injuries slowly healed. My meager savings dwindled to almost nothing, spent on medicine, rent for a tiny room, and rice. Lord Lijian, I grumbled while grinding medicinal herbs with a stone mortar, the bitter smell filling the small space, you had better repay me tenfold for these treatments when you recover. He had finally told me his name on the 3rd day. Of course, my dear Chen Yue, he said with an easy smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. But as you can plainly see, I don't possess even a single copper coin at present. Only these worthless bones and this battered body. Will you accept them as payment? His tone was teasing, almost flirtatious. He was infuriatingly charming despite being injured. He told me his name and age, 27 years, but remained mysteriously vague about his background and family. When he recovered enough strength to sit up, he would spend hours drawing complex diagrams and calculations in the dirt of the small courtyard with a stick, muttering about formulas and proportions I couldn't understand. In my spare time, to calm my anxious heart, I would weave small toys from dried grass or carve simple mechanisms from bamboo scraps, little birds with movable wings, puzzles that interlocked, skills my mother had patiently taught me during our isolated years in that forgotten courtyard. Lijian was always amazed by these humble creations, examining them with genuine fascination. You're brilliant, Yue, he would exclaim, using the intimate diminutive without permission. In a different time and place, you could have been a renowned craftsman whose works would be treasured by collectors. What was a renowned craftsman? I barely understood, but the sincere praise felt as sweet as Osman thus candy. Li Jun had a deep sword wound across his back, still angry and red despite treatment. I couldn't afford to hire a proper nurse, so I tended to it myself each evening, cleaning and applying medicine. At least he wasn't as demanding as Chen Yue, who had required everything to be done in a specific manner and would complain if my touch was too rough or too gentle, criticizing endlessly. This man looked lean beneath his robes, but his body was well muscled from years of martial training. In the candlelight, sweat would bead on his brow from pain and trail down his neck as I worked. He would turn his head away toward the wall, his ears visibly reddening, and urge me on with a strained voice. "Are you finished yet, woman? Could you be faster? If you don't finish the application soon, I might not survive this torture." For some reason, my usual patient temperament completely vanished around him. I would pat his wounded back with perhaps more firmness than strictly necessary, making him hiss. "Be patient, Lord Li, good medicine is bitter, and proper treatment takes time." One humid evening, he turned his head suddenly while I was leaning close to examine his wound. I realized with a start how near our faces were. His warm breath, smelling of the herbal tea I'd made, tickled my nose. I pushed against his shoulder, but he was solid as a wall despite his injuries. He chuckled softly, his dark eyes bright with mischief and something deeper. "I know what I can teach you in return for your devoted care." "What?" I asked, momentarily dazed by his proximity and the intensity of his gaze. "Liuli," he said, using the Chinese word for glass. "I'll teach you the technique of making liuli. That will earn you substantial silver, more than enough for medicine and a comfortable life." Strangely, against all reason, I found myself hoping he wouldn't repay his debt too quickly and leave me alone again. But the prospect of learning glassmaking fascinated me. In those days, liuli was an exotic treasure, mostly imported from the western regions along the Silk Road, its price exorbitant, affordable only to wealthy merchants and noble families. I had heard Chen Yue boast to his friends about an import business in liuli wares that earned him hundreds of taels each year. Li Jun explained he possessed the secret formula and technical knowledge from his travels, but the actual execution and craftsmanship would depend on my hands and patience. I appreciated deeply the feeling of being trusted with something valuable and secret. We failed many times in that makeshift workshop behind the rented room, producing cloudy, cracked pieces. But he never grew impatient or mocking when I made mistakes. "There's plenty of time, Yue," he would say gently, helping me adjust the temperature of our small furnace. "My Yue is the cleverest woman in all the land. You'll master this." Chen Yue would never have said such things. He would only have mocked me for wasting resources and reminded me how much silver I owed. Finally, one morning when the light was perfect, from our carefully tended crucible emerged a piece of clear, flawless liuli, a small cup that refracted rainbows when held to the sun, colors dancing across our hands. "Li Jun!" I cried out in joy, running to him where he was preparing breakfast over the fire. "Look what we've created." He turned from the stove, carefully washed his hands in the basin, and took the cup with reverence, holding it up to catch the light. "A token of your affection and skill. I accept it with gratitude and will treasure it always." He then tucked it carefully into his inner sleeve, close to his heart. I stared at him in confusion, my cheeks warming. "I never said it was a token of affection. It's just our first successful piece." He dampened a cloth and gently wiped the soot and dirt from my face with tender care, his fingers lingering. "You've seen my body during treatment, you've eaten the food I've clumsily prepared, and now you've given me a treasure made by your own hands. Am I mistaken in any of these observations?" He emphasized the words, "seen my body," with deliberate meaning, his eyes dancing with amusement. I felt my face flush hot as though I'd stood too close to the furnace. He leaned closer and kissed me gently, briefly, like a butterfly landing on a flower. "Foolish Yue. I told you long ago, though you didn't hear, I've already given myself completely to you. The stars were exceptionally bright that night above the water town. I listened to the beating of my own heart and the distant sound of a flute playing somewhere across the canal, and decided for once in my life to be selfish, to reach for something I wanted. Li Jun, I said softly, touching his jaw gently. I must tell you something honestly. I have been married before. I won't deceive you about my past. You can leave now if this changes your feelings. I would understand. I know, Yue, he said with complete calm, no surprise in his voice. You simply had the great misfortune of meeting a terrible person first, someone unworthy of you. Should I hold another man's blindness against you? Should your past suffering determine your future happiness? He took my hands in his. No, I'm the one at fault for not finding you sooner, for not being there when you needed protection. He pulled me into his arms, and I could feel his heartbeat. I cannot reveal my complete identity and circumstances just yet, there are reasons, dangerous complications. But I swear this truth, my parents are deceased, and I have only one elder brother in this world. I've already written to him by secret courier, requesting that he prepare proper betrothal gifts to welcome you into our family with all due honor. Tears fell from my eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. I wiped them on his sleeve without caring about propriety. I don't need elaborate gifts or ceremonies. Just buy a pair of red wedding candles tomorrow from the market. I'll sew my own veil from red silk. That's all I want, a simple, honest beginning with you. That was all I had ever wanted, to be chosen, to be valued, to be loved without conditions or accounting. A year later, at the Suzhou docks where boats crowded the canal and merchants called their wares, Lord Chen Yue, pale and wrapped in an expensive fox fur cloak despite the mild autumn weather, stepped carefully from a passenger boat, leaning on his cane. The liuli from Jiangnan had become famous throughout the empire, its quality surpassing even Western imports, devastating his own import business and costing him thousands of taels. He had heard from a porcelain merchant that Chen Yue might be in this region, and so he had come personally, swallowing his pride. He intended to purchase the liuli-making formula at any price and monopolize this new trade. He'd heard the technique was held by a young common couple of no particular background. If they refused his generous offer, well, he had brought men who could be persuasive through other means. He arrived at the house of Liuli, marked by a sign with elegant calligraphy, to find it more crowded than the famous Yunlai tea house during New Year festival. Wealthy customers crowded inside, and then he saw her through the open door. Her face had filled out, no longer gaunt with hunger. 2 small dimples appeared when she smiled at customers. Her hair was dressed beautifully with jade ornaments. Her eyes were bright and confident as she moved gracefully through the shop. She was running toward the entrance where he stood. Was she so delighted to see him after all this time? Had she been waiting for him to find her? In that instant, Chen Yue's anger and resentment vanished, replaced by something like relief. Very well, he thought with satisfaction, straightening his robes. I'll pretend I never saw that separation letter. I'll even increase her monthly allowance when we return to Linen. She's clearly learned her lesson about trying to survive without me. But Chen Yue ran past him as though he were invisible, like a joyful bird taking flight, straight into the arms of a tall man in fine robes who had just entered behind him. What took you so long? I asked breathlessly, inhaling the pleasant scent of sandalwood from Li Jun's robes. We sold more than 800 taels worth of liuli today. The orders keep coming faster than we can produce pieces. Li Jun brushed a stray leaf from my shoulder tenderly, his touch lingering. My Yue is the cleverest woman in all the land, just as I always said. His expression grew slightly more serious, though his hand remained at my waist. My brother sent men to locate me again. It took considerable effort and some careful maneuvering to send them away without revealing my exact whereabouts or arousing more suspicion. A furious voice cut through the air from behind us, sharp as a blade. Chen Yue. Look closely at who stands before you. Who is your legal husband? Chen Yue's eyes were red with rage and something that might have been genuine pain. He lunged toward me, his cane clattering to the ground. For a moment, I was genuinely startled by the raw emotion on his usually composed face. He was here in Suzhou, having traveled all this way. But my mother was at peace now, her ashes finally laid to rest in her ancestral village. I had no more debts to the past, no more chains binding me. Who my husband is has nothing whatsoever to do with you, Lord Shen, I said quietly but with absolute firmness, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in our acquaintance. The separation document, Chen Yue's teeth were clenched so hard I could see his jaw muscle working. I never formally agreed to it or stamped it with my seal. It's not legally valid in any court. Are you truly still harboring resentment over a birthday gift? I was merely being kind to your elder sister as propriety demands. Come, Chen Yue, let's return to Linen together. I'll forgive all your past behavior, your willful departure. We'll start fresh. Li Jun stepped forward protectively, his hand moving to the sword at his waist, but I stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. I can handle this matter myself, husband. I turned fully to face Chen Yue, this man who had defined 3 years of my life. I'm not angry with you about gifts, Lord Shen. Anger would imply I still care about your actions. The truth is simpler. Silver marks were exhausting to earn, clicking that abacus until my fingers bled. It was too cold to wake at midnight to fetch your medicine with no charcoal for my own fire. And I no longer wish to beg for scraps of basic human dignity like a starving dog begging at a table. I took a steady breath. The Shen Manor was never my home. What kind of home requires you to pay rent for your own bed and account for every bowl of rice? You're free now to propose marriage to my sister Wanru, if that's what you've always desired. I release you from any obligation. Panic flickered across his refined features, quickly replaced by desperation. I never intended to marry Chen Wanru. She means nothing to me beyond courtesy. How could you think such a thing? He reached for my sleeve in a gesture I recognized from his rare moments of wanting something. Chen Yue, let me explain everything properly. We can discuss this rationally back home. Li Jun had clearly had enough of this display. He slapped Chen Yue's hand away from me with insulting ease, a cold smile on his handsome face that didn't reach his eyes. Lord Chen Yue of Linen, it's been some considerable time since we last met at court gatherings. Did you hear what my wife just said to you? She's a reasonable woman of great patience. I, however, am not reasonable at all when it comes to her well-being. I stared at Li Jun in surprise. My former husband and my current husband seemed to know each other, had met before in some capacity. You never told me you were acquainted with him, I whispered, confused by this revelation. He looked down at me gently, protectively. I didn't want you to worry about unnecessary complications or feel any pressure, Yue. Your past is your past. Get out of my way, whoever you are, Chen Yue started to say dismissively, then he truly looked at Li Jun's face for the first time, recognition dawning slowly. He froze completely, his face draining of all color. Prince Li Jun, but the reports from the border said you were dead, killed in the tribal ambush. How are you standing here in a Suzhou Liuli shop? His voice rose with each word, attracting attention from the street. Li Jun took my hand possessively, lacing our fingers together. Thanks to my wife's devoted care and skilled nursing, I managed to survive my injuries when others had given me up for dead. Where she is, that's where I belong. Husband and wife should not be parted, surely even you understand this principle, Lord Shen. Still reeling from the revelation of his true identity as an imperial prince, I nodded somewhat dumbly, my mind racing. Yes, that's correct. We are properly married. I managed to say, though my heart was pounding. The shop is quite busy today, as you can see, my dear, Li Jun said, his tone softening when he addressed me. Shall we return to our work? We have many orders to fill. My jealous husband, I was beginning to understand his possessive nature, couldn't resist a parting comment. He clapped Chen Yue on the shoulder with false brotherly friendliness. By the way, Lord Shen, I must express my sincere gratitude for your profound lack of judgment and your remarkable talent for failing to recognize a treasure when it lived under your very roof. Your loss has been my greatest gain in this life. Chen Yue stood there in the doorway, his face ashen as paper, leaning on his cane, and watched us walk away together through the shop, my hand secured in Li Zhen's. His expression was that of a man who had just realized he'd thrown away a priceless jade carving, thinking it was common stone. That evening, we purchased our usual meat buns and sweet pastries from the night market for dinner. All the way home along the canal path, I was bursting with questions I could barely contain, my mind spinning. Li Zhen seemed remarkably unfazed by the entire encounter, greeting neighbors calmly. "What are you thinking about so intensely, Yue?" he asked as he opened the gate to our modest courtyard, now considerably improved from when we'd first rented it. "Your forehead is all wrinkled with worry." I sighed deeply, explosively. "How can you possibly be Prince Li Zhen? Even I, isolated as I was, have heard of you." The new emperor, Li Ming, was his full-blood brother, more than 10 years his senior, and they were said to be exceptionally close despite the age difference. The previous emperor's sudden death had elevated Li Ming to the throne. Would the emperor permit his younger brother to marry a divorced woman of common birth? A concubine's daughter? The thought saddened me deeply, made my chest tight with fear. Li Zhen sighed in response, almost mockingly. "Can't an imperial prince have a wife he actually chooses? Must everything be arranged for political alliance? I don't want to be a concubine in your household, even a favored one," I said, my voice small. My mother's life of quiet desperation and secondary status, watching the principal wife from the shadows, was not one I wished to repeat. The very thought made me ill. He flicked my forehead gently, affectionately. "Silly woman. I have absolutely no intention of taking any concubines, ever. You alone are more than enough for any man. And don't worry about my imperial brother. If he disapproves of our marriage, I'll simply threaten to renounce my title and become a Buddhist monk in some remote mountain monastery for the rest of my days. What could he possibly do then? He can't drag me from a temple." He set the food on our simple wooden table with none of the ceremony expected of a prince. "Once we've properly established the House of Liuli's reputation and business operations, we'll return to Linen and address your divorce legally in the courts. We'll present the separation document and make it official and sealed. For now, food is more important than worry. Come, eat while it's hot." I devoured a meat bun, pushing all my concerns aside for the moment, trusting him. He wanted to marry me properly. It was his problem to solve with his imperial brother and the court. I would let him handle it. After our simple dinner, as I was happily counting the day's substantial earnings with the abacus, I had kept it, reclaiming it as my own tool. Li Zhen suddenly swept me into his arms without warning, lifting me easily. "Your worries are settled for the evening. Now it's time to settle mine." I saw in his dark eyes that he was not nearly as calm and unaffected as he had appeared earlier. Seeing Chen Yue had stirred something possessive and fierce in him. I wrapped my arms around his neck and kissed him, tasting sweet pastry on his lips. "Just once, then. We both have work tomorrow." "All right, my beloved Yue." But it was a lie, as I should have known. The next morning, I awoke to find him at our small desk, writing furiously with brush and ink, still undressed from the night before. My waist and legs ached from his passionate enthusiasm hours earlier. I kicked him playfully with one foot from where I lay. He caught my ankle immediately and began to massage it with strong fingers, working the soreness. "You wouldn't lift your legs last night despite my requests, and now you're quite flexible with your kicks. How interesting and contradictory you are, wife. You said just once." I protested, throwing a pillow at him. You lied to me, Prince Li. A true gentleman keeps his word, he replied smoothly, not even looking up from his calligraphy, his brush moving steadily. Fortunately for both of us, I never claimed to be a true gentleman. I'm just a man in love with his wife. I tried to pull my leg away, but he drew me closer with surprising strength, draping my leg over his bare shoulder with deliberate, provocative intent. It's still quite early, Yue. The shop doesn't open until the hour of the dragon. Shall we, again? I whimpered in mock protest and prayed silently to any listening deities that Chen Yue would not appear again to complicate our lives. But he did appear, persistently. Every day for the next week, I would feel his eyes watching me at the house of Liuli from across the street where he stood in the shadows. He even sent his personal attendant with increasingly desperate letters. Young Mistress Chen, the servant said formally, bowing low, since you departed the Shen Manor, my lord has been searching for you across 3 provinces. His leg injury has worsened considerably from travel, and he hasn't smiled even once or attended any social gatherings. He exists in darkness. He hopes you might reconsider and show mercy. It was a blatant plea for pity, an attempt to manipulate my sympathy. I am no longer your mistress or associated with the Shen household in any capacity, nor am I a physician, I said coolly. Lord Shen should consult a proper doctor at one of Linen's excellent medical halls. Perhaps his inability to smile is a symptom of some deeper illness requiring treatment. I couldn't possibly help. I finally accepted the latest letter just to be rid of the persistent servant who was disturbing our customers. It was filled with nonsense about how an imperial prince could never officially marry a divorced woman of common birth, about societal expectations and court regulations, about how I was ruining my reputation further. How I should return to him and accept my proper place. Had Chen Yue ever been genuinely good to me during our marriage? I tried to remember objectively. Occasionally, perhaps twice a year when he was in an expansive mood after drinking good wine, he would purchase me a simple wooden hairpin from the market or have the kitchen prepare a few extra pastries beyond my earned ration. But it was the careless, dismissive kindness one shows to a pet that performs tricks adequately. He had made no single great unforgivable mistake, committed no dramatic betrayal. I simply no longer wished to live a life of constant submission and hunger, of earning the basic right to exist in my own home, of being invisible. I threw the letter into the small brazier and watched it burn to ash, the characters curling and blackening. Chen Yue, who had been watching from his usual spot across the street, came forward immediately when he saw the smoke, his jaw tight with tension and his eyes desperate. You are still my legal wife according to the marriage contract. I will not let you go to live in sin with another man, even if he is a prince. I pointed to the door of the shop and smiled pleasantly, like one might smile at a stranger. Be on your way, Lord Shen. You're disturbing my customers and my peace. Suzhou and the surrounding Jiangnan region were situated close to the southern border where local tribal factions had grown increasingly restless and bold in recent years. Li Zhen had been investigating their collusion with corrupt court officials, tracing silver payments and weapon shipments, when he was ambushed on a mountain road and nearly killed by hired assassins. That troop of Imperial cavalry I had seen months ago on my journey south was searching desperately for him after he disappeared. To continue his investigations safely and draw out the traitors, he had allowed rumors of his death to spread throughout the empire, hiding in plain sight. The scoundrel had even kept this from me until recently, claiming he didn't want to burden me with dangerous knowledge. 2 days after Chen Yue's last appearance, a contingent of black-armored Imperial guards appeared outside our courtyard gate at dawn, their presence drawing curious neighbors. It was time to depart for the capital. I looked around our small courtyard at the pear tree just beginning to bear its first autumn fruit, at the ceramic jar of wine we'd buried at its roots to age properly, at the workshop where we'd created our first successful Liuli piece. Li Zhen laughed at my melancholy expression, understanding. Silly woman. It's not as if we're never coming back to this place. We'll return every year if you wish. This is where we truly began. I packed only my glass-making tools carefully wrapped in cloth, my mother's urn which I would never leave behind, a few pieces of our best lurely work, and my handsome new husband, and we set off for linen under Imperial escort. What? You want a divorce? You dare come before me demanding a divorce? At the Chen family residence, my father official Chen Daran stood in the great hall, his finger trembling as he pointed at me accusingly, his face red with rage. You shameless girl! You've brought complete disgrace upon this entire family. Do you know what people are saying about us? But father, I said with carefully practiced innocence, kowtowing properly, elder sister Wanru was granted a divorce just last year. Why should different standards apply to your two daughters? My sister had married a young marquis shortly after I had departed for the Shen household. The man had turned out to be a complete degenerate, caught in a compromising position with a male servant in his study by multiple witnesses. Wanru, with her proud nature and supported by Madame Liu, had divorced him immediately and returned home in fury. You dare, my father raised his hand to strike me, his palm already swinging. Two of the Imperial guards Li Zhen had assigned specifically to protect me stepped forward instantly, their hands on their sword hilts. Official Chen, do not lay a hand on our mistress, or we will be forced to intervene. My stepmother Madame Liu clutched her chest dramatically, swaying as though she might faint. This is absolute madness. Rebellion. Send someone to the Shen manor at once. Send urgent word to Lord Shen. See if this terrible situation can be salvaged before it's too late. Mother, I said, my voice dropping its false innocence, turning cold as winter water. Speaking of family obligations, I nearly forgot to inquire about something important. You and father both promised before my marriage that you would care for my birth mother, provide her with proper medicine and physicians, ensure her comfort. How is it, then, that she died alone and uncared for within 3 months of my wedding, without even a servant to bring her water? I let the accusation hang in the air. They had wanted me to remain quietly with the Shen family, bearing any hardship, never complaining. Yet they wouldn't honor even the smallest promise or offer even basic human kindness. At Chen Wanru's birthday banquet the previous year, an old servant who had been genuinely kind to my mother had secretly found me and told me the devastating truth. My mother had died shortly after I was married, her illness worsening rapidly without proper care. The old woman had saved her ashes for me at great personal risk, hiding them until she could pass them to me. Wanru arrived then in the hall, a sneer on her beautiful, carefully painted face. So, little sister, you finally escaped your gilded cage at the Shen household. Or did Lord Shen simply tire of you and throw you out for being useless? How pathetic you look, groveling here. The kingfisher feather headdress I'd seen Chen Yue gift her was still prominently displayed in her hair, glittering expensively. One of my Imperial guard protectors slapped her hard across the face without hesitation. Insolence and disrespect toward our mistress will not be tolerated under any circumstances. Wanru shrieked like a wounded bird and lunged at me, her carefully manicured nails extended like claws. You little bastard! You worthless concubine's daughter! You dare have me, the legitimate daughter, struck? I'll scratch your eyes out! I slapped her other cheek myself, hard enough to leave a clear handprint, ensuring her face was symmetrical. I flexed my hand, satisfied with the sting in my palm. I don't just have people strike you, elder sister. I'm perfectly capable of doing it myself when you deserve it. When my father and stepmother tried to physically intervene, rushing forward, they received exactly the same treatment from my guards. The household's private guards, poorly trained and maintained, were absolutely no match for my two elite Imperial protectors who had trained for years in the palace. Li Zhen's men were proving very useful indeed, I thought with satisfaction. Back in linen proper, Li Zhen and I separated temporarily for propriety and practical purposes. He went to the Imperial Palace to present his carefully gathered evidence of corruption and treason to the Emperor in formal court session. I went to the Chen family residence to make my divorce from Chen Yue official through legal proceedings and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I returned to the remote, neglected courtyard my mother and I had once shared in happier times. It was dusty, covered in fallen leaves and spider webs, long abandoned. As I cleaned and prepared to sleep, I heard a soft noise at the window, like a cat on the roof. It was Li Jin, climbing over the courtyard wall in dark clothing like a common thief or assassin, though he was an imperial prince. He was exhausted from hours of intense meetings and political maneuvering. He slipped into my simple bed and held me close without words. "My dear Yue, just wait for me 2 more days with patience. My imperial brother has agreed to everything after I explained the full situation and threatened convincingly. As soon as the matter of the tribal conspiracy is completely resolved and the guilty officials are arrested, he'll issue the formal decree for our marriage with full imperial approval." "Really? Truly?" I asked, afraid to believe. I kissed him happily, tasting tea on his lips. "Then you must come and fetch me quickly in a proper bridal sedan. I'll be waiting and preparing." The next morning, I went on a systematic, methodical rampage through the Chen household, packing all of Chen Wanru's valuable ornaments, jewelry, expensive hair accessories, and fine clothing into my own trunks as a proper dowry, as compensation for years of suffering. My father, obsessed with his scholarly reputation and social standing, refused to seek outside help or report the situation to authorities, too ashamed. The next day, I took his prized inkstone carved from rare stone, several valuable landscape paintings by famous artists, antique porcelain vases, and his collection of rare books. He finally snapped under the pressure, unable to tolerate more loss. He summoned the Chen clan elders in desperation, elderly men with long beards who rarely involved themselves in family matters. "I will have this unnatural, disobedient daughter struck from the family records entirely. She is no daughter of mine." In the ancestral hall, surrounded by memorial tablets and incense smoke, the elders stroked their beards and looked at my sister and me with obvious disapproval and disappointment. Divorced daughters bring tremendous shame upon the entire clan's reputation. And now there are 2 of you from one household. Unprecedented. Send them both to a Buddhist nunnery to live out their days in contemplation and prayer, one elder suggested seriously, as though we weren't standing right there. "No need for such measures," I said pleasantly, calmly. "My father has spoken his wish clearly. It would be profoundly unfilial of me to disobey his direct command. Please, proceed with removing my name." My father nearly choked on his own breath, not expecting me to agree. The elders sighed collectively and brought out the precious family registry with solemn ceremony, the book that contained generations of names. Just as the eldest was lifting his brush, dipping it in ink to strike my name from the records forever, a servant burst into the hall frantically, nearly tripping over his own feet. "My lord! Masters! Prince Li Jin is here at our gate. An imperial prince has come to our humble residence. He has come to present a formal marriage proposal." The entire hall froze in stunned, absolute silence. Even the incense smoke seemed to stop moving. "To our house?" "To the Chen family," my father stammered in complete disbelief, his face transforming. "Impossible. There must be some mistake." "Yes, my lord. No mistake. The betrothal gifts are already being carried in through the main gate by dozens of servants. Red silk everywhere. Gold and jade. The neighbors are all watching. Excellent news. Wonderful fortune," the elders beamed suddenly with unanimous enthusiasm, their disapproval vanishing like morning mist. "An imperial princess from our Chen clan. This is unprecedented honor. Go quickly and inform the ancestors' tablets. Prepare the hall. Someone bring wine." I smiled quietly to myself. "Not from your clan anymore," honorable elders. That bridge is already burned. But who is the prospective bride? An elder asked eagerly, looking between Wanru and me with confusion. Which of official Chen's daughters has caught the prince's eye? My stepmother immediately pushed a blushing, preening Chen Wanru forward, arranging her robes. Ah, Wanru, naturally. The legitimate daughter. I distinctly remember Prince Lijun showing her particular attention and favor at a poetry banquet 2 years ago. He composed a verse about lotus flowers while looking in her direction. Did he really? I murmured. Wanru shot me a triumphant look, her eyes glittering with victory and malice. Watch closely, little sister, as I marry in splendor and become an imperial princess. Mud from the pond can never compare to the lotus flower blooming above it. You'll spend your life looking up at me. We shall see, elder sister, I replied calmly, examining my fingernails. The day is not over yet. We all processed formally to the front reception hall with its red pillars and hanging lanterns. Lijun stood there in the center, magnificent in a deep purple robe embroidered with coiling golden dragons, a jade crown in his hair, every inch an imperial prince. He caught my eye immediately across the room and smiled with obvious warmth and barely concealed amusement at the situation. Chen Wanru curtsied with practiced, exaggerated grace, lowering herself elegantly. Your Highness, you honor our humble Chen family with your august presence. He ignored her completely as though she were invisible or a piece of furniture, and unrolled a golden imperial scroll with the emperor's seal, reading in a clear, formal voice. By imperial decree and heavenly mandate, it is hereby declared that Chen Yue, formerly of the House of Chen, shall be wed to Prince Lijun with full imperial approval and blessing. The union is ordained by heaven and sanctioned by the Son of Heaven. Let all know and bear witness. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd like wind through bamboo. All eyes turned to me in utter shock and confusion. I stood calmly and walked forward through the crowd to take the scroll from his hands. Let us go, Your Highness, I said clearly. I am no longer of the Chen clan as of this moment. I have no ties remaining here. He nodded with satisfaction and ordered his servants to collect both the substantial betrothal gifts and my newly acquired personal dowry to transport immediately to his princely residence. Wait. Stop. There's been a terrible mistake. Chen Wanru shrieked, grabbing desperately at his embroidered sleeve with both hands. Your Highness must have misread the names. They sound similar. I am the one fit to be an imperial princess. Chen Yue is just a lowly concubine's daughter, a divorced woman of ruined reputation. How can she possibly? A severed fingertip fell to the polished floor with a soft sound, followed immediately by her piercing, agonized scream that echoed through the hall. Lijun sheathed his sword with calm, practiced efficiency, his face expressionless. I will not hear another word spoken against my wife, not even from her own family. The next offense will cost more than a fingertip. He took my hand gently and led me away from that house forever. I didn't look back even once. That evening in his residence, a beautiful compound with gardens and pavilions, he brought out a small lacquered wooden box from his personal belongings. How do you have the wooden bird I made as a child? I asked, genuinely astonished, taking the delicate toy carefully. It was the same one, I was certain, a little mechanical bird with wings that moved. It was a gift of sorts, though the giver didn't know its true value, Lijun explained, sitting beside me. Years ago, when the Shen family fell from imperial favor after backing the wrong prince, your former husband Lord Shen sent me many expensive treasures through intermediaries, hoping desperately that I would speak favorably to my brother on his behalf, influence the emperor toward leniency. I kept only this humble wooden toy and returned all the gold and jade. I thought to myself, the maker of such a clever, delightful thing must be a brilliant person worth knowing. I assumed it was him, naturally. He smiled ruefully. I thought perhaps he had some redeeming qualities if he could create something so charming. I kept it on my desk for years. So that was why Chen Yue had always been relatively generous with his accounting marks whenever I created a new toy or mechanical device. He was taking credit for my work, presenting my creations as his own to advance his political standing. I considered this carefully, then asked Li Jun with mock seriousness, does one need to pay with silver marks to reside in an imperial prince's residence? Should I prepare my abacus? I am not so petty or cruel, beloved, he said with amusement, pulling me close. He handed me an ornate jade tablet carved with his personal seal. This is the key to my personal treasury. Spend as you wish on anything that brings you joy, clothes, jewelry, books, materials for your inventions. Where my treasure is, there my heart is also. What's mine is yours. I smiled at him, feeling warmth spread through my chest. And what would you like in return for such generosity and trust, my prince? He looked at me, his dark eyes soft with deep affection. Favoritism, Yue. There is already one person in this world who thinks you're brilliant beyond measure, who sees your true worth. For the rest of your life, however long we're blessed with, can you be just a little biased toward me? Can you choose me, every day? I kissed him softly. All right, Li Jun. I can do that. I will do that gladly. Chen Yue's POV. 5 years later, the southern tribal factions openly rebelled against imperial authority, attacking border towns. The emperor was furious, and numerous corrupt officials who had been supplying them with weapons and intelligence were punished severely, some executed. The Shen family was prominently among the guilty. Not sentenced to death out of consideration for their previous service generations ago, but exiled 3,000 li away to the desolate frontier regions. Chen Yue, desperate to restore his family's tarnished honor and recover lost wealth, had resorted to illegal means, secretly selling military-grade armor and weapons to the tribal forces through intermediaries. As his prison cart departed linen in chains, Li Jun and I were returning from a diplomatic mission to the south with our young daughter. I saw him in the distance through the crowd, the once proud lord now a broken man in iron chains, arguing bitterly with the woman he had married after me, Chen Yue, who had agreed to marry him in desperation after losing her fingertip and all marriage prospects. They made each other utterly miserable, I'd heard. Our paths had diverged completely and permanently, as if we had never shared any history. My husband Li Jun had a brilliant theoretical mind but was hopelessly clumsy with his hands in practical matters, unable to craft anything without cutting himself. I was the opposite, better at execution and detail than grand theory. Together, we created many new inventions and improvements which we presented to the imperial court to manufacture and distribute, splitting the substantial profits with the imperial treasury. Coincidentally, many of Chen Yue's remaining business ventures failed as a direct result of our innovations making his methods obsolete. The emperor, who had no daughters of his own from his empress, absolutely adored our little girl, Li Annalise. At first, he hadn't been particularly fond of me, skeptical of a divorced woman of common birth as his brother's wife. But after I presented him with one useful invention after another that improved agriculture and commerce, his initial displeasure gradually shifted entirely toward Chen Yue instead. He somewhat irrationally blamed him for holding me back from my potential all those years. What a waste of talent, he would declare. I never told him that without Li Jun's theoretical knowledge from his mysterious past, none of our inventions would have been possible. We were truly two halves of one whole. Li Jun had a secret, something about his past he never fully explained. But I didn't pry or demand answers. In this life, I had learned that it's sometimes better not to know everything, to accept the gift of love without questioning its source too deeply. Li Jun's POV. I had a secret I never fully shared with Chen Yue, though she suspected something. I was born into this life with complete memories of a past existence, another world entirely different from this one, a world of different technologies and knowledge. Before I met her, I had no true emotional home in this life despite my imperial blood. I had knowledge but no anchor, purpose but no peace. It was she who pulled me from the cold water of that canal, from despair and loneliness, and gave me reason to live fully. Later, when I learned of her past suffering with that Chen fellow, it didn't matter to me even slightly, though I admit to considerable jealousy and anger on her behalf. I knew immediately she was a pearl of rare quality, someone extraordinary. I simply polished her until she could shine with the brilliance she inherently possessed and deserved. My Imperial brother Li Ming was absolutely furious when I first announced my intention to marry a divorced woman of common birth. There are so many fine women of good family in this empire, he had roared, pacing his study. Daughters of ministers, noble families lined up hoping for imperial connection. Why must you choose this particular woman? Because she is the only one for me in all the world, Imperial brother, I had replied with absolute certainty. Her character is faultless, her mind brilliant, her heart pure. I will have her or I will have no one. Then I refused to give my blessing or approval. So I threatened seriously to renounce my title, shave my head, and become a Buddhist monk in the remotest mountain monastery I could find, dedicating my life to copying sutras. He relented within 2 days, knowing I was stubborn enough to actually do it. He had intended to pass the throne to me eventually, as he had no sons and I was capable. But I never wanted that heavy burden, that golden cage. All I wanted was a small, peaceful home with Chen Yue, to create things and live simply. Years later, when our hair had turned white and our granddaughter played in the garden, I asked her during a quiet evening, if you had to live your life over again from the beginning, knowing everything that would happen, would you still have saved me from that canal that day? She was eating a sweet osmanthus cake, a smile on her aged but still beautiful face. Of course I would, you foolish man, she said, touching my hand. I recognized the armor you were wearing that day. A soldier in that same type of armor once saved me from a violent drunkard when I was a little girl of perhaps 10, sneaking out at night to buy medicine for my dying mother at an emergency apothecary. He drove the man away and gave me coins for the medicine, asking nothing in return. So when I saw you in the water, I thought perhaps heaven was giving me a chance to repay that kindness. Some fates and debts are written in the stars long before we consciously know it. I smiled, remembering that night years ago when I had been drinking with friends and saw a small girl being threatened. I had forgotten completely until this moment. I held her weathered hand in mine. Yes, perhaps some fates truly are written in the stars, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Chen Yue's POV. I never thought I would truly lose Chen Yue permanently. I disliked her intensely at first. It was a deliberate insult, being sent an illegitimate concubine's daughter after my family's catastrophic fall from grace and favor. The abacus and the cruel accounting system were just ways to vent my frustration and rage at the world, at my circumstances, at the unfairness of losing everything I'd expected in life. But she took it all seriously, never once complained or argued, and she accepted all my ill temper and cruelty without protest or resistance. I was an extremely difficult, particular eater, yet I could always consume her simple cooking without complaint. My leg injury required constant, careful attention, and she tended to it day and night without being asked, her hands always gentle. She was like soft dough, infinitely moldable, never pushing back against my demands. I grew accustomed to her silent presence, her competent service. I realize now I took her completely for granted. I often wondered during these long, dark nights in exile, if I hadn't given Chen Wanru that expensive kingfisher feather headdress, hadn't flaunted my wealth while starving my own wife, would Chen Yue have stayed? I only bought it to show off to my friends, to prove I still had wealth and status, to make Chen Yue feel small and insignificant, to remind her of her low position. But she left without a single backward glance, walking away from everything. I thought she was merely angry, playing games, that she would inevitably return within days. Where else could someone like her possibly go? A divorced woman with no resources. But then I found the letter of separation on the dressing table, the very same document I had written myself years ago in cruel jest, never imagining she would actually use it. Only then, far too late, did I realize how deeply and thoroughly I had wounded her, how completely I had destroyed whatever feelings she might have had. When I saw her again in Suzhou, she was married to an imperial prince, glowing with genuine happiness I had never given her or even tried to give her. I was filled with corrosive regret and bitter resentment that ate at me constantly. I drank expensive wine to numb the pain of loss. I married Chen Yue in a moment of spite and desperation, thinking perhaps I could recreate what I'd lost. We made each other utterly, profoundly miserable. She was nothing like her sister, all demands and complaints and vanity. When we were exiled together after my treason was discovered, I finally understood viscerally what it meant to be truly hungry, to be cold, to have no one care for you with genuine concern. My leg ached constantly from the hard travel and poor conditions, and there was no gentle hand to ease the pain with medicine and massage. I died on that desolate road to distant exile, my body consumed by wild dogs and left to rot, unmourned and unforgiven. As my soul drifted upward in those final moments, I saw her one last time in a vision granted by heaven or hell. She looked up at the sky and called out, "Husband! The weather is perfect today." Prince Li asked her what she wanted for their evening meal. "Both dishes. I'm so hungry I could eat everything," she cried happily, laughing like a carefree child, so different from the quiet, fearful woman I had known. Their warm laughter faded into the distance as I faded into cold darkness, and I was left with nothing but eternal regret for the priceless treasure I had discarded as worthless, for the love I had killed with my own hands through cruelty and blindness. If you enjoyed Chen Yue's journey from suffering to happiness, from being treated as worthless to becoming an imperial princess, don't forget to subscribe to Lotus Tale Studios for more heartwarming historical romance stories. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which character you sympathized with most, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale of love, revenge, and redemption. Until next time, may you all find someone who sees and treasures your true worth. Thank you for watching.